Welcome to Pillow Talk Mamas with Anna Mari and Troy. I'm Troy,
I'm Anamari.
and today we're going to do another Halloween episode doing True Crime Canada Part 2.
Canada Part 2 starts off with the Tourette's killer. 58-year-old Michael Wayne McGray was born July 11th, 1965 in Ontario and raised in Argyll, Manitoba, Nova Scotia. He didn't have the best childhood as he claimed that his father was a violent alcoholic and would beat him and his mother. Michael was sent to a reform school for boys in Shelburne, Nova Scotia. He says while there, he got in fights constantly and was abused physically and sexually. He began to kill animals while away at school and developed a fascination with serial killer true crime.
Mm.
He was first convicted in 1982 for dangerous use of a firearm. 2 years later, he was convicted on charges of forgery and 2 counts of breaking and entering. Another year later, in 1985, Michael was convicted of dangerous driving and sexual assault. He was in and out of prison for years, even disappearing for over a year while on parole at one point.
Mm.
I don't know how somebody gets away with something like that, but the National Parole Board was concerned with Michael's substance abuse, anger, and disappearance while on parole. From 1985 to 95, he was a drifter moving town to town. May 1st, 1985, Elizabeth Gail Tucker was attempting to relocate from Weymouth, Nova Scotia, and figured she'd hitchhike. 19-year-old Michael spotted 17-year-old Elizabeth and allegedly masked that he wanted to force sexual favors from her in order to lure her into the car. She refused and his attempts failed. This angered him to a point of stabbing and murdering her.
Oh my gosh.
Her decomposed body wasn't found until October 6th that year by a hunter and his dog and had to be identified with dental records by them. At this time, Michael wasn't linked to her murder. 2 years later, on November 14th, 1987, Michael McGray, Norm Warren, and Mark Gibbons attempted to rob and kill a taxi driver in St. John, New Brunswick. When the trio's plan failed, one man in particular allegedly and unwillingly took the blame and paid with his life. When police arrived, they discovered Mark's body at Market Square. Norm was charged with Mark's death, and Michael testified for the Crown, which is the legal system up in Canada,
Right.
against Norm, but he was found not guilty. While Michael was charged for his role in the robbery and sentenced to 5 years, at this time he was not connected to Mark's murder either.
Hmm.
While Michael was serving time for said robbery, he was granted a 3-day furlough and could stay at a Montreal, Quebec, Lord, halfway house in 1991. March 30th, he met 59-year-old Robert Astley in Montreal's gay village. By the way, that is the actual name of the village. Robert later made the fatal mistake of inviting Michael back to his apartment. Immediately after arriving, Michael stabbed Robert in the chest and throat multiple times, ending his life. The next day, Michael returned to Gay Village, where he met 45-year-old Gaetan Etier, hope I'm saying that right, who also invited Michael back to his place. This time, Michael spent the night at Gaetan's apartment, but in the morning, he stabbed him to death.
Oh my gosh. Why do people even invite people back to their house? It's so weird just to think like, oh, I met a
Yeah,
stranger and like you can come back to my safe abode. It's okay.
right. Honestly, I know this does not equate, but I used to think the same thing about like kissing people on New Year's. It's like, oh, it's New Year's, grab somebody and kiss them. I'm like, I don't know if you got the herpaderps or
Mm.
if something's going on.
Right.
I can't with it. But um, Michael also didn't return from his furlough to finish his prison sentence. Instead, he went on the run for 2 months until being found and rearrested.
Mm.
At this time, Michael wasn't connected to Robert or Gaetan. During one of his many releases from prison, Michael met a woman named Tammy. I did my research, tried my best. They said her name was Tammy McLean. I'm not entirely sure if that last name is factual.
Okay.
In Halifax, Nova Scotia. The two traveled cross country and even into the US for 4 years. Tammy became pregnant with Michael's son and gave birth February of 1995. Sadly, their son passed away only 3 days later,
Oh.
causing Michael to start heavily drinking as he blamed himself. The pair found work and stayed put for a while. According to Tammy, roughly 4 months after their loss, Michael attempted suicide. She came home early from work on June 10th, 1995, and found Michael with slit wrists and a note stating that he was sorry for their son's death and it wasn't her fault. 5 months later, in November, Brenda Way's body was found in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, with her neck slashed.
Mm.
This was fairly close to Halifax, but Michael wouldn't come under suspicion for many years. Just a few days after Brenda's murder, Michael and Tammy moved out of their apartment, allegedly leaving their belongings on the curb and their cat behind to move in with Tammy's mother.
So they sound like they were on the run from something.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not entirely sure of Tammy's knowledge or involvement. There was some alleged, not necessarily involvement, but more so like Michael forcing her to do certain things with the next victim. I believe he like forced her to leave the woman's apartment, I guess so she wouldn't be a witness, but it's not posted anywhere that she, reported him at all.
Okay.
So in early 1998, Michael and Tammy moved again to Moncton, New Brunswick. This is where Tammy met a woman named Joan Hicks. Joan told Tammy she'd recently moved to Moncton with her daughter Nina and was looking for an apartment for them. Unfortunately, she soon found one. Moncton police received a tip from an informant March 1st, 1998, which led them to the body of 48-year-old Joan Hicks and her 11-year-old daughter Nina in their new home. Once police arrived, they found Joan laying in a pool of congealed blood on the bathroom floor, as she had been there since the evening before.
Yeah, but sis, that definitely sounds like she's been there for a hot minute. That it took some time.
Yeah. She was beaten, strangled, and her throat had been slit with a serrated knife. Some reports online claim it was a bread knife.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't know how. I mean, it says that her throat was slit, not that she was, decapitated or anything.
Right.
But I feel like that would, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that would take a bit much with a standard kitchen bread knife.
Well, it's saying bread knife, not butter knife. Those are two different things.
Right.
So serrated means that it has like the ripples. So
right.
That's harsh though. It's not a clean cut like you
Yeah.
would with like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine.
No, neither could I. Plus, men, I mean, he looked to be like a sizable man and probably had some strength to him. So there's also that. Nina was found hanging in her closet. Allegedly, the informant that called in the double homicide was a man named Glenn Bennett, who was an accomplice that night. So there's stories of Glenn and Michael going over to Joan's house, Tammy being there, and him telling her to leave, hailing her a cab, and that Michael and Glenn kind of like bust into the apartment. I think Glenn asked to use the bathroom or something like that, and then Michael took it upon himself to do all of those things. And apparently Glenn was allegedly really shaken up about the night's events because he seemed disheveled, they had mentioned, when he showed up at the police station the next day. Like, he didn't sleep that night and was not okay with what happened.
Well, at least you know he has a soul.
Yeah. I really don't think if all of that was true, I don't think Glenn had any intentions of doing any of those things to Joan, and especially her daughter.
Right.
Being 11.
Yeah.
Michael was arrested again, and once in custody, he confessed to Joan's murder while he denied Nina's. He admitted to murdering 18 people across Seattle and in Seattle, I'm sorry, 18 people across Canada and in Seattle, Washington.
Mm.
Wanting to strike a plea deal, Michael started divulging all kinds of info about victims and homicide details and requesting psychiatric treatment. So he knew that there was something off about him.
Mm-hmm.
He confessed to the disappearance of teenager Kimberly Ann Amaro, stating that he killed her and buried her on the Kingston Peninsula between St. John and Kennebecasis rivers. Authorities claim to have searched the entire area, yielding no results till this day. Some believe the entire area was not searched. That's a whole story in and of itself if anyone is interested in researching Miss Amaro or hearing about her on a later podcast. Michael also confessed to killing hitchhiker Elizabeth, his robbery accomplice Mark, and Robert and Gaetan from Gay Village. RCMP Canadian authorities began an investigation which uncovered evidence that Michael was telling the truth. It was then that he was convicted. During this time, Brenda Way's boyfriend, Glenn Assoon, was serving a sentence for her murder. He was found wrongfully convicted and released
Okay.
after 17 years in prison.
I
So,
get that time back.
yeah, this was in 2001. I'm not going to lie, I did not delve into Glenn Assoon's story and see why, first of all, why he was that strong of a suspect to have served 17 years. Like they were sure
Right.
for almost 2 decades that this man did this. I'm not entirely sure what led to him being such a strong suspect. But like you said, time is the one thing you cannot get back. In 2001, Michael confessed to murdering Brenda in addition to 11-year-old Nina. He's still going through the court system to be convicted for Brenda, making it alleged for the time being. It's said that Michael didn't initially confess about Nina because he knew that how they treated child killers in prison.
Oh, which means you deserve it though. Like you did what you did. So why are you a
Right.
fear of your consequences?
Absolutely. So, while admitting to 18, Michael was only charged with 7 murders and given several life sentences. He told investigators without his help, they'd never solved the other murders and closed unsolved cases in Calgary, Halifax, Moncton, Montreal, Ottawa, St. John, Toronto, Vancouver, and Seattle. So obviously we know he was traveling a lot, but that's quite a bit.
It is a lot. It's excessive. Like he was definitely doing all this intentionally. It's not like I came across this
Absolutely.
person and like accidentally murdered them because we got into a heated argument. Like he had every intent
Right.
on finding people and doing this.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. Also stating that his victims were sex workers, drug addicts, and homosexual men. The Crown refused to make him a deal, but he did receive a 60-day psychiatric evaluation as requested. The assessment stated that Michael had a severe form of Tourette syndrome that made him unable to control his impulse to murder, which is interesting because if anyone doesn't know, Tourette's is a neurological disorder and it is described, paraphrasing, it's described as having like this I think some people consider it like an itch or a tingle or stinging, and others will consider it like a physical pain if they don't release their tics. But typically ticks are, like twitching of different body parts
Right.
or blurting out different phrases, sometimes vulgar phrases. But I have never heard of somebody that's like, I've just got this tick I need to release to murder somebody.
Yeah, never
So,
heard of it. Like I know it's impulsivity, like I get that, but
yeah,
like to say like I have this impulse to hurt something or someone doesn't sound like a
right,
Tourette's issue. That sounds schizophrenic or bipolar, even just because of the temperament change. But
right. And
Tourette's,
obviously, he had the ability to connect with people, being with Tammy for years, creating a life together with her, and feeling, sadness and empathy and
right?
grief. So it just doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, so he definitely wasn't a sociopath. Like he had the
Yeah.
abilities of a human or a normal human to
Yeah.
function, like you said, to like love or to feel remorse when it comes to like
Right.
when he lost his son and stuff. So I
Yeah.
think he was just
Even empathy for
crazy.
Tammy. Like, he's like, it's my fault. It's not your fault.
Right.
He clearly had the ability to empathize.
Yeah. So I think he was just plain crazy and had a craving to kill. I don't think we could blame it
Yeah,
on any other psychiatric issues, to be quite honest.
I agree. In November 2010, Michael, who was serving time at a high security prison, was moved to Mountain Institution Correction, a medium security prison in Agassiz, British Columbia. Michael stated that he didn't know why he'd been moved to medium security as he wasn't a medium inmate. So, again, self awareness. His 33-year-old cellmate, Jeremy Phillips, was scheduled to be released on parole in 6 weeks. Michael killed Jeremy. Hours later, he called the guards and confessed.
Mm.
Jeremy's murder was apparently so gruesome that one of the guards later filed a trauma claim with WorkSafe BC, saying that the scene was like a horror movie.
Oh, wow.
Before Jeremy's death, he stated concerns about being in the same cell block as Michael and pled to be transferred because of the continual life threats from Michael, but was ignored. A prosecutor stated that Michael claimed Jeremy invented a false hostage scenario in order to attempt escape from prison. Michael was to tie Jeremy up so he could later be brought to the infirmary. Michael supposedly devised this plan, strangling Jeremy instead. Between these claims, Jeremy's upcoming parole, and Jeremy's concerns being disregarded, his family sued the Correctional Services of Canada. Michael claims he didn't have any qualms with Jeremy, but it was all just about himself. In 2012, he was moved to Saint Anne de Plaine, Quebec, to serve his 7 life sentences, likely within the Special Handling Unit, or the SHU, as some people know it, of Regional Reception Center, which is considered Canada's highest security prison, or supermax. Due
Okay,
to
where he should have been
coroners,
prior.
right, all along. Due to coroner's inquest, it was recommended thereafter that serial killers be housed in single cells, which should have also been the case to begin
Yeah.
with. Michael was roughly 2 to 12. I'm sorry, Michael went roughly 2 to 12 years between proven murders. So it's widely believed that many more simply couldn't be proven due to his drifting and lack of evidence. As for the murders that Michael continues to claim, oddly, nothing has come of it. Cold cases were even reopened to see if he was guilty of them. Even though Michael received treatment and medication, he never showed remorse for the murders he'd committed. He reportedly said, "I wish I felt bad for the victims because that's what society wants to hear.
Mm.
But I don't. There's no emotion at all." Michael Wayne McGray will be 72 years old before he's eligible for parole in roughly another 14 years. Unless, of course, he's officially charged for Brenda's murder, in which case he will receive more time. So that is our Tourette's killer.
That was insane to have to hear. Like,
Yeah,
I appreciate his honesty in saying, like, I have no remorse whatsoever. Like, I don't feel bad for them. Like, I appreciate the
right.
honesty so we can know where your headspace is versus the, what do you call it? Like the fake tears and like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do
Yeah.
what I did. Please take it easy on me. Like, no, he was like, I straight
Honestly,
up did what I did.
God forbid I'd ever be in the shoes of a family member of a victim of something like this, I feel like either would really piss me off. If you're crying, I'm like, I feel nothing for your tears. You know what you
Mhm.
did. And then the lack of remorse is like it's not like they're being disrespectful. It is disrespectful, whether they intend to be or not. It's very disrespectful to
Right.
take someone's life and beat and mangle them and be like, well, you know, everybody wants to hear that I feel bad, but I don't. That would piss me off.
Yeah, there's no winning
So,
in that. That's for sure. It's no
yeah,
winning.
absolutely. I do feel like justice does help, but I know it's not like, the end all be all for these families.
No, not at all.
So, that's unfortunate.
Okay. Our second story for Canada Part 2 is The Highway of Tears. Who are the victims and what's being done about it? The victims are missing and murdered women and girls who greatly seem to be Indigenous. These girls and women are said to often engage in high risk activities and unfortunately live in impoverished areas where they can't afford transportation.
Mhm.
We're going to circle back around to that.
Okay.
There are retired RCMP or Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers and PIs that attempt to work these cases, but they occasionally receive pushback from authorities. PIs in British Columbia are governed by a statute that gives them many of the powers that police have, including investigating cases without obstruction from the public and executing warrants. British Columbia grouped 18 unsolved cases that became the responsibility of an RCMP group called EPANA, though the community would claim that number should be much, much higher. So in my research, I've seen that the Native people of Canada have said that that number should be like well over 50. But
Wow.
there are reports that that number could be in the hundreds.
Oh.
Yeah, it's pretty, like my husband asked me, okay, well, how many victims were there? I was like, there's literally no way possible for me to tell you that because a lot of these cases have never been solved.
Right.
And the nature in which these cases happen, it's like the drifter situation. Like
Mhm.
he could have been laying bodies out all over the place
Yeah.
and they just were never found. So Nipana was named for the goddess Hana of Inuit mythology, believed to watch over souls in the underworld Adlivun, if I'm saying that right, until they're ready to travel to the land of the moon, Kudlivun, where they find peace and eternal rest.
Mhm.
The group's name was an interesting choice, as some cases are homicides, but some were reported missing. So within the mythology, this goddess is, caring for these souls and transporting them to their final resting place. But it's not 100% proven that all of those women have passed on. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So they've had funds cut significantly over the years, EPANA. In past years, approximately 60 investigators worked these cases, but after their last victim was found in 2006, 17 years ago, no one's been added to the list, and barely a handful of police were actively involved. Inclusion criteria for EPANA's cases are as follows: female, involved in a high risk activity, i.e., hitchhiking or sex work, last seen or found near highways 16, 97, 5, or 24 in British Columbia, and evidence indicating a stranger attack, i.e., no suspects or grounds to believe that death was the result of a suicide, misadventure, or domestic violence.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. Allegedly, that's something that will be somewhat circling back around to. So remember the inclusion criteria for these cases.
Okay.
Allegedly, the RCMP has falsely labeled many of these women as impoverished prostitutes or drug users living risky, irresponsible lives. These negative stereotypes are said to be not the true story or life experience of these victims. So a lot of families are pissed off, let's say, or heartbroken, maybe some of them, that these women and girls are being painted in such a light when allegedly they were involved in these things. The hitchhiking was the case for a lot of these women, as it was, decades ago. And that was something that people could do safely. Not so much today. Articles have stated, quote, "It's really easy for people to think there's something lacking in these people. Well, it's what we stole. It's time to re-examine how we set them up to ensure that they fail," end quote. Indigenous communities have survived immeasurable oppression, racism, and targeted violence. People connected to the cases have even admitted to deleting all emails relating to the Highway of Tears. Take a guess, Troy. What year RCMP created this task force? Keeping in mind, these cases are known to have started in 1969.
So when did they start the task force for these?
Yes.
1997?
Not even 19.
Oh no.
2005.
Oh my gosh. I was like really hoping to not push those 2000s.
2005 in the fall. So the end of 2005.
Wow.
And their first known case, because of course, if this was happening at first until it became a pattern, they're not going to, attribute it to these set of cases.
But decades passed. There was a pattern. Like by the fifth person, it's a pattern.
That's what I'm saying. Like 1969 was the first they knew. So it's possible it's well past, like maybe into the 50s, early 60s. And it seems by 2014, less than 20 active officers remain. And that's coming down from the 60, I believe they mentioned before.
Okay.
Where is this happening precisely? Approximately 725 kilometers or 450 miles stretch between Prince George and Prince Rupert in British Columbia, near
a wide range.
Those 4 highways I previously mentioned. It winds through sparsely populated towns, dense forests, and indigenous communities and reserves. It's said to be largely isolated, remote, soft-soiled in many areas, and have carnivorous scavengers that carry away human remains. So again, this is between 1969 and present, over 5 decades. In the early 2000s, these cases started being talked about more publicly. This is allegedly because a Caucasian woman went missing, which resulted in an extensive search party forming to find her, and the case being picked up by the media.
That's okay.
Yeah. Granted, all of these victims matter, of course, every single one. But it is very disheartening to hear that Indigenous women after Indigenous women and girls are being slain and just ripped away from the world, missing no sign. And they're like, well, we got a Caucasian victim. Now we got to step it up.
High alert, everybody. Like that don't make no sense. That's unfair. And that's a big injustice for all the previous victims for sure.
Absolutely. So there's apparently no statute of limitations on serious crimes in Canada. And the majority of these cases along the highways have never been solved. While many people could still serve time for these crimes, few have ever been caught. The rest roam free. So I had picked up this story because it interested me that it was put in a way that there was either one serial killer throughout all the years, or a set of serial killers that either work together or were all doing their own thing around the same time. They're like, oh, this serial killer is doing this, I'm going to join in on the fun, so to speak.
Right.
But apparently from my knowledge, the people that they have caught don't have anything to do with each other.
Okay.
So these are just, you know, disturbed people who are taking advantage of something that was set in place decades ago.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I don't think that they're connected. I don't think it's one person, especially for the
Yeah.
time frame. Like it's too extensive for it to be one person to
Right.
kind of carry on that lifestyle, that behavior for so long, because your body
Right.
does weaken and get older, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're doing some serious stuff like, kidnapping and all that stuff like that. So it had to be more than one person. And I was
Yeah.
like, the odds of it being a group, like, how do you find another murderer? Like, how do you go, hey, so do you like murder? And
I
like, you know
know.
what I do? We should do it together. Like, that's so far-fetched to think that
Yeah.
way. So I think it's just a bunch of psychopaths that just all had the same idea at the same time.
Yeah. And they're not copycats either. Of course, you've had like, you have your Ted Bundy and then your copycats, the Zodiac and the copycats.
Mm-hmm.
These are not copycats. They just are all, you know, joining in on something that has already been happening for decades, which
That's
is,
terrible.
it makes it harder, to catch them.
Yeah, yeah.
Men have been discovered driving vans with door handles removed from the inside, duct tape, plastic wrist restraints, and trap doors. So, not sure why nothing that I know of is being done about that. There are theories that people may have disposed of bodies in beehive burners, which were used by mills to dispose of wood chips.
Mm.
There was a group formed called Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women up in Canada that provides, support for families and resources and things like that. A woman who works with family services stated, "People aren't listening. When asking, for the national inquiry, it begs the question, quote, why hasn't anything been done? We understand that this is an issue. Stephen Harper said it's not on his radar right now, and this is an Aboriginal issue." That's the leader of Canada. That's systemic racism right there to say it doesn't affect us. Well, if
Mm.
it did affect white women living in Ottawa, do you think that we'd be having a discussion if there should be a national inquiry? Of course, it would be an inquiry. It's not an Aboriginal issue, it's a Canadian issue. I think the Highway of Tears represents the relationship that we have with RCMP and a lack of trust. It's different if you imagine, what if it was my sister, daughter, or grandma that went missing? What would you do? And what would you expect the government and RCMP to do? End quote. After Canada's 2015 federal election, the Liberal government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau upheld their campaign, Lord help me, promise, and announced the initiation of a national public inquiry on December 8th, 2015. Again, remember, it started in 69. RCMP estimates 70 to 80,000 people are reported missing each year in Canada, and most are found within 7 days. Recent data from 2020 says British Columbia has the highest number of missing adults per capita at 239 per 100,000 people. Indigenous females, what'd you say?
No, I was saying that was a lot. That's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Indigenous females are disproportionately represented in these reports. According to the Assembly of First Nations, 11% of female missing persons are Indigenous, despite Indigenous people only making up about 4.3% of the population of Canada.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
They're quite obviously being targeted.
Yeah.
So now we have our victim stories. Again, there were a lot of proven victims, 18 cases on EPANA's list, 50 that they believed and that are posted online. You can see these cases, but I do not have 50 victim stories here. Our first case investigated by EPANA was the homicide of Gloria Lavina Moody, On October 25th, 1969, the 26-year-old mother of two from the Bella Coola Indian Reserve of the Nuxalk Nation had been traveling with family on a weekend trip just off Highway 97, and a day later, her naked body was found by hunters. Local reports say she bled to death after being beaten and sexually assaulted.
Mm-hmm.
Though there were multiple persons of interest, no one was ever arrested. Reportedly in 1998, police told her family that the three main suspects were all dead and all leads were gone.
Mm.
Debatably, the first missing case on the Highway of Tears was Helen Claire Frost on October 13, 1970 in Prince George, British Columbia, off of Highway 97. Recently broken up with her boyfriend and having been convinced by a welfare worker to give up her newborn baby girl for adoption, the 17-year-old went out for a walk after 8 p.m., 4 days before her 18th birthday. Her sister Sandy declined to accompany her as it was too cold, but Helen would never return. Assuming she stayed at a friend's, Sandy didn't report her missing for 2 days. There was a tip that Helen had hitchhiked from a gas station in Prince George. This was investigated, but not substantiated. Numerous officers have been assigned to Helen's case since 1970, with the most recent being assigned in 2017. Sandy has also pushed to get Helen's name added to the EPANA list of victims, but the RCMP declined the request, citing that the case didn't meet inclusion criteria. While many cases meet criteria, no victims have been added to their list since 2006. So, remember I said keep in mind the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
She is a female. She may not have definitely hitchhiked.
Mm-hmm.
It was alleged that she hitchhiked, but she was out late by herself and possibly did hitchhike. And there's no reason for her to have gone missing, domestic violence, any of the things that they had mentioned in their inclusion criteria. So it was a little, disheartening for the family that they're like, hey, we meet the criteria. We want to be on this list. And they denied them that.
Wow.
So there's 2 updates. One sad and one a little bit more positive.
Okay.
In 2009, Sandy reported that their father had said he hopes to know what happened before he dies. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2014, never discovering the truth. So that's very sad. It makes you think about how much this has really, really affected these families for how long and how deeply. In 2018, Sandy, the sister, was reunited with Helen's daughter, Michelle. Michelle was searching for her birth mother and found Helen's dedication page on Facebook and contacted Sandy, saying she believed she was her niece. So I actually was able to watch a little clip of like a news story of them sitting together and smiling with each other and hugging each other. Of course, they still have that, weight of feeling like we need to find our family member. Yeah. But they have found each other.
That's sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah. So our next 3 cases all tied together. In 1973, 19-year-old Gail Wace disappeared while hitchhiking. Her body was found in a ditch on Highway 5 6 months later. That same year, 19-year-old Pamela Darlington vanished while hitchhiking. Her body was found the next day. RCMP said convict Bobby Jack Fowler was considered a strong suspect in both Gail and Pamela's cases. August 9th, 1974, 16-year-old Colleen McMillan was last seen hitchhiking to a friend's house on Highway 97. Her body was found 28.58 miles south of where she was last seen. RCMP this time said convict Fowler's DNA was actually found on Colleen's body. Fowler was an American rapist and suspected murderer active in the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, wow.
From 1973 to 95.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And he was charged for a murder within the U.S.
Okay.
But not to my knowledge was he ever charged in Canada.
Oh.
Unfortunately, before the connection to Colleen was proven, he died of lung cancer in 2006 during a 16-year sentence for convictions of rape, attempted rape, and kidnapping in Newport, Oregon.
At least he never got released.
Yeah,
Goodness.
that's true. So Gail, Pamela, and Colleen were all EPANA cases. May 6, 1978, EPANA investigated 12-year-old Monica Jack of the Lower Nicola Indian Band, who was last seen riding her bike toward her home on the Cochena Reserve, and later only her bike was found in a ditch of Highway 5. Witnesses said that they saw a truck and trailer in the area and heard someone crying out. For 17 years, her fate was unknown. June 1995, forestry workers found her remains in a remote area off a logging road. Dental records and DNA tests had to confirm her identity. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled. Monica is the youngest known Highway of Tears victim.
That's so heartbreaking. Oh my God.
A baby.
It's making me wonder, like, because they're on a reservation. So I feel like I know there's not like armed guards at the reservation, but like you really have to know your way around it to kind of get on it to get access to their people. So it makes me wonder if it's somebody within the community.
Well, a lot of these girls and women hitchhike. They said she was biking, and they said toward her home on the reserve.
Oh, okay. So she
The
wasn't
highways
there.
wind through areas of dense forests and reserves. So she
Okay.
was probably biking on the highway headed to the reserve.
Oh, okay. Okay. Because I heard reserves and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
So Monica also has an update.
Okay.
In 2019, previously convicted rapist Gary Taylor Hanlon was charged with a life sentence for taking Monica's life. He appealed and was denied the appeal. We love that. The case relied on his November 2014 hidden camera confession to an undercover cop posing as a crime boss. He said, quote, "I remember picking up a broad one time, having sex, then I just lost it for some reason. I think I strangled her. I'm not sure." End quote. I have so many thoughts and not enough time with everything that he said. He'd also said he knew she was Native, agreed that she could have been 11 or 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And that he left her someplace. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that this man was full-blown disturbed.
Yeah, it was.
Because there's a lot to unpack in all of that. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs posted a social media statement standing with the families and calling for justice, healing, and an immediate end to the genocide of their women and girls. EPANA investigated 24-year-old Alberta Williams of the Gitxsan tribe, again, hope I'm saying that correctly, who went missing in the early morning hours of August 26, 1989. Her sister said she vanished from a cabaret right in front of her after Alberta invited her to go to a party. The family thinks they know who did it and relay less info to the police than their PI, who's worked their case for years, which is very telling that she would bypass the police. Alberta's new body was found strangled and sexually assaulted a month later on September 25th, about 23 miles east of Prince Rupert near Tyee Overpass. An RCMP officer noted days before she was found, bloody clothes resembling hers from that night were found appearing to have been tossed in a bush. There's theories that the clothes were seized, then destroyed by police, being believed to be unrelated to her case.
Wow.
The RCMP didn't take the evidence seriously because her body hadn't been found yet.
That makes sense, right?
Absolutely. Bloody clothes in a bush doesn't match any of the DNA we currently have. Throw it away.
Silly. Absolutely silly. Ridiculous.
100%. A 2006 article indicated that her family didn't want her on the RCMP Highway of Tears list. But her case was given to Ipana anyway, possibly against family wishes. There's been no arrests, no leads. So I'm not entirely sure how to feel about that. When it comes to topics like this, it's very touchy. And I feel like you should absolutely respect the family's wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you have other cases of people who are probably begging to be put on this list. And you're like, no, not you. And then you have a family that says, like, we don't want this, splattered all over the media. And
Mm-hmm.
they're like, too bad.
Because she doesn't fit the criteria per se. Like she wasn't hitchhiking. She was on
Right.
her way to a party. She's not in a high risk situation. Like she wasn't doing anything dangerous. She was just on her way somewhere. So she shouldn't have been on the list anyway. She shouldn't have been part of the group.
Right. I watched a clip of an interview with her sister. So her sister was saying, that she was hanging out with friends. They were a little bit younger. So she was
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't want to sit over there. I'm going to kind of do my own thing. She turned to, I believe, her boyfriend, if I'm not mistaken. Split second, turned back around, Alberta was gone.
Wow.
So she also stated that the police refused to inform the family whether or not Alberta ever made it to the party. So my thought process is they didn't look into it
Mm.
because I don't know how much police divulge when they have open cases and things like that, but um again, the fact that she's more willing to deal with her PI, like she fully relies on this man, is very telling of the authorities in Canada.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's so disheartening, but at least they're doing the steps it takes to resolve it. So not
Yeah.
mad at them.
Next are 15-year-old cousins Cecilia Nicole and Delphine Nicole. Cecilia was last seen October 1989. She was not included on Ipana's list. Reports of her last location vary, but she was reported in the Smithers area near Highway 16 and in Vancouver Island. Delphine was last seen June 1990, so the following year, hitchhiking along Highway 16 and King Street and was included on Ipana's list. At approximately 10 p.m., she'd called her uncle to tell him she was on her way home from Smithers. Sadly, the Nicole family also lost Cecilia and Delphine's cousin, Roberta Nicole, murdered within a few years of Delphine's disappearance. Allegedly, they never even knew that she was missing. I believe Cecilia and Delphine were both members of the Wet'suwet'en tribe, but I was only able to find information for Delphine.
Okay.
But one, them being family, and two, I found like an Instagram page that I believe was Cecilia's sister.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't access all of that information. Obviously, it's a public page, but I wasn't able to fully verify. But I believe she's part of the Wet'suwet'en tribe as well. June 11th, 1994, Ipana investigated 16-year-old Ramona Lisa Wilson, reportedly part of the Gitxsan Nations. She was believed to have hitchhiked from Smithers to hang out with friends. April 1995, a year later, her body was found along Highway 16 near the Smithers Airport. Several items were in a small organized pile a few feet away from her. Other objects nearby included a small half-buried rope, 3 interlocking nylon ties, and a small pink brass knuckles type water pistol. So very interesting. July 1994, Ipana investigated 15-year-old Roxanne Tiara, who told a friend she was going out with a customer. She was allegedly a sex worker. Sadly, she'd never be heard from again. So I've seen several reports of her being a sex worker, but because they mentioned that the police had like falsely put these titles on some of these women and
Mm-hmm.
girls, I'm not 100% sure if that was true.
Mm-hmm.
Her body was found a month later on August 17th, 1994, in a bush along Highway 16. She'd been stabbed to death.
Mm-hmm.
December 1994, 15-year-old Alicia Leah Germain was last seen at a Christmas dinner at the Native Friendship Center in Prince George. Hannah took on her case. Her body was found near Highway 16. She'd been stabbed to death and was reportedly friends with Roxanne Diarra.
Hmm.
Commonalities between Ramona, Roxanne, and Alicia's cases supposedly prompted the creation of IPANA.
Oh, wow.
So, again, that was in 2005. And these cases were all in 1994. So, almost a decade or over
Yeah.
a decade.
Yep. That's
October
a lot of
7th,
heartbreak for
it
so
is.
long.
October 7th, 1995, 19-year-old Lana Derrick vanished after heading east on Highway 16 to her home in Hazelton, British Columbia. She was last seen at a gas station in Thornhill, Ontario. Rumors say she got into a car with two identified men. Her disappearance was investigated by IPANA, but she was never found. September 21st, 2005, 22-year-old mother of one, Tamara Lynn Chipman of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, disappeared while hitchhiking on Highway 16 in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, near an industrial park. Her case was also taken on by IPANA. While her family and community conducted a search for her, they aren't sure that police conducted their own. Allegedly, in 2015, her aunt said that their family had given up going to authorities for answers. Just extremely sad. A totem pole was raised by Tamara's family in 2020. And that's the
Mm.
only update I was able to find, sadly, on her. February 2nd, 2006, 14-year-old Ayla Sarek Auger of the Laidley Tene First Nation became the last case on IPANA's list. Family members said she spent the night at a friend's house. She was last seen in Prince George, British Columbia. 8 days later, a motorist found her almost unrecognizable nude body on an embankment on Highway 16, 12.43 miles east of Prince George. It's never been officially proven that a serial killer, or killers by definition, committed these crimes. Police have caught, convicted, or identified 5 different men in these cases. The 2006 Highway of Tears Symposium devised a solution to help reduce the potential for any women to be added to the list of victims. Sadly, it's been reported that very few of their plans ever materialized, and it took over a decade to get a reliable and reasonably scheduled bus line. So, seems like a very simple, not solution, but
Mm-hmm.
something to help these women. They're
Mm-hmm.
living in isolated areas. They don't have travel. They're hitchhiking. They're being kidnapped and murdered. Get a bus line. So they have a bus, but the schedule is just not, you know, it's not, what is the word? There's not enough buses that run. So
Okay.
these women and girls that are going to work and school, if they miss a bus, it could be an hour, hours before another one comes.
Mm-hmm.
They're not like typical bus lines.
Right, when you have one running every 15, 20 minutes. Like they're literally going from point A to point B and that's it. Like there's no buses circulating in the middle.
Right. And thinking about the space between stops, I would assume would be a great distance. Like there's no walking to the next stop or the previous stop trying to catch the next one. Like that it defeats the purpose of the bus line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's unfortunate.
that is our story for the Highway of Tears. And then if you have any questions, I do have additional information.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to hear like these indigenous women having to go through this and then being categorized as these, ill-fated women who have these backgrounds. And I'm trying to I'm trying to word it without completely like demonizing them, but that's what it
Yeah,
comes down to. Like they're saying, well, they're sex workers, they're this, they're that. And it's like, no, these are just women who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also they were being victimized because they were being picked out. Like it was happening to this
right,
specific ethnicity. Like that it has to have more attention. There has to be more done to not only
yeah,
protect the women that are still having to deal with it, because at the end of the day, it's stuck in the memory of everybody who experienced it. Like your reservation, once something happens on it, it's going to affect everybody indefinitely. There's no
right.
it is what it is. So it's just sad to hear. I just wish that there was some relief for the community to say like not only are they resolving the disappearances and the murders, but they're also doing something to prevent them in the future. Because that bus line is just not it. It's not helpful whatsoever. And it's
No.
like it's not that hard to provide a proper bus line. Like you have the means, like, but you're just not willing to give the funding to this specific community, which also goes back to it being injustice.
And then EPANA having their funding cut, the the funding was already cut, but if they had so many funds to begin with, like you said, that money could have been rerouted to not just a bus line, but they had several other, plans that they supposedly were supposed to set in place,
Mhm.
but it just doesn't seem like any of them ever were.
It just seems like the Canadian authorities just don't care enough, and it's kind of pathetic. I'll just say it outright. It's pathetic and it's
Yeah.
sad because no matter where you go, Indigenous and Aboriginals are just not treated with respect and dignity that they deserve.
Yeah,
And I just think this is completely messed up, and they need to stop being overlooked because they're still human and they deserve a quality of life that everybody else does.
100%. Very sad. I'm thinking, I didn't even think, like the Aboriginal people over in Australia. Um, my thought process was after doing this research, Canada and the US, a lot of people know, you know, of the injustices that were done to Native Americans
Mhm.
over however many years, decades. Um, it's there's no excuse for it. Absolutely no excuse. I mean, the oppression of any set of people by race, ethnicity, culture is there's no excuse for it.
Not
But
at all.
Native people, Indigenous people have definitely dealt with their fair share, unfortunately, their unfair share.
Hopefully, these families get some resolution sooner than later, and no more family has to die without knowing the truth of what's going on or not. Like it's
Yeah,
going to probably be a lot of cold cases, especially because they cut the budget. It's not enough police really being able to investigate it. And,
yeah,
there's so much time that has passed, and with the evidence not being done correctly, there's no way for future officers who are dedicated to say, I'm gonna reopen this case because like they didn't do
right.
the evidence correctly either. So it's just like there may never be a resolution, but I hope at some point they have comfort just knowing like this isn't really happening anymore, only if they're able to implement things to keep these women safe.
Yeah. Well, I think the only other recent, of course, I don't have the year. Um, I think the only other recent update that I was able to find was for Madison Scott,
Hmm.
20-year-old in 2011. Um, there's all kinds of articles online about her if anyone is interested in looking into her story. But her remains were found, which
Okay.
again is not the outcome that her family was looking for, of course. But hopefully with the advancements that we have now today, I think it was within the last like few years that those remains were found. And I'm hoping that with today's advancements in DNA testing and technology and things like that, that they're able to find not just a suspect, but like get a conviction.
Right. Yeah.
And hopefully maybe connect that conviction to other cases. Like you mentioned, reopen cold cases. And hopefully, if the evidence wasn't messed around with or not stored properly or not enough of it was taken, hopefully they'll be able to use Madison's case to solve other cases as well.
You just need a new generation of eyes, you know what I mean? Like, when there's an injustice like this, especially in this specific community, like, you need to have members of that community kinda join the force and be advocates from the inside, because it seems a lot easier that way, but, of course, that's a whole 'nother issue in itself, trying to get hired,
Yeah.
in the law enforcement to be able to work on these cases, but definitely need people from the inside, working on the inside to get these done correctly, I think.
I was just about to say, I wonder how many Indigenous people attempt or are even interested in getting into the RCMP. Like, if you guys are not going to look out for our people, we're going to do it from the inside.
Yeah, right,
I'm not entirely sure how many there are, or like you said, if they make it harder for them, I don't know. But that is a possible way to move forward. Of course, it's not going to solve all of the cases. Some of them are probably too cold of a case, but it could help.
anything helps.
Yeah. So sadly, that was our last story for Canada.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today with part 2 of our true crime series for Canada. I know some of the stories were a bit heavy and difficult, but in any way that you can support these communities or these cases, please reach out, go online, do some research, and see how you can help. But in the meantime, check back in for something else new for the month of October.
Peace and love.
Bye.